honored to be joined by Céline Sciamma. Céline, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Céline, I noticed this is your first feature-length film that is not about adolescence, that is not centered around adolescence. And I'm wondering why it took this period of time to get to a film about this stage of womanhood.
Yeah, I wonder too.
Is that something that you had been plotting when you started your work, I don't know, over 10 years ago as a filmmaker? Did you think, I'm going to be charting the progress of a person's life over time and I'm going to be looking at the different phases of life? Or is this just something that sort of comes to you naturally, organically?
Yeah, it did happen organically. But after Girlhood, I kind of decided that this would be a trilogy. I kind of handed it also to the press, saying, like, promoting Girlhood. It was like, this is the end of a trilogy. Also because I wanted to depart, and I wanted to actually, it was a way to make it happen. But I didn't have the scheme where I would go through the different steps of childhood and teenagehood. But it's actually the case, because Water Lilies was about really beginning of adolescence. Tomboy was about the end of childhood, and Girlhood was about the end of adolescence. I think it has to do mostly with the fact that I got the opportunity, the privilege to make film at a very young age, because when I wrote Water Lilies, I was 26. Basically, it was obvious that I would write about teenagehood, because I wanted to write about something that I knew.
Do you think it's useful to have that 20-year remove from the experience to be writing about it in that way? Are you looking at things in that specific way? Did you think about this film in that way too?
I think this film, I'm 40 years old now, and I was really, really wanted to have a new experience in crafting portraits with grown-ups character, and wanting to tell about a love story that was fully lived, whereas the rise of desire with teenage characters is mostly about discovering yourself. And I really wanted to, and about love that is not completed. And I wanted to depart from that frustration and go with the full love dialogue, and also work with professional actresses. So it was a way also to put, to depart also from the comfort of, your craft. I think also it was a way, working around coming of age story was a way to figure out what kind of director I was, because you're not enslaved to casting. You're not, you get to have also a more equal relationship with your cast, for instance. Not be set into this idea that, okay, you make a first film and then you make a second one with more money. For instance, Tomboy was cheaper than Water Lilies, for instance. And those things, I think about them a lot. They're not happening by chance. I'm trying to not compromise ever, and to build each film as a prototype, and to be free. So to make them not too expensive, and also working with teenagers was also a way to find, my own way of directing, understanding myself as a director. And with these 3 films, first film, I was like, okay, I think now I'm ready for adulthood.
Even entering Girlhood, you felt that way? You felt like it would be almost on a more level playing field with your actors if they were not as experienced? Because by then, I feel like Tomboy and Water Lily is very well received, beloved by many people.
Of course.
So you have you're reputational in the world at that point, and even still, you felt like it would be easier for you at that stage to work with more inexperienced people.
Well, I think I wasn't thinking. It was different for Girlhood, because the movie was more. I experimented. It wasn't about. I was kind of confident now with actresses, and not being anxious at all. But it means that this discomfort, I could rely on that, but to be more bold on other levels of the films, like narratively, and making it bigger. So Girlhood's real film regarding the script, the construction. So it was another form of prototype, I must say. And this time, I really wanted to, it was kind of a paradox, but to focus on the fact that I wanted to make the most contemporary object, the most contemporary film. And the paradox was that it was set in the past, but that would set the ambition and the bar. Like you can't compromise with the fact that it has to be super contemporary.
Do you anticipate this being the first part of a new trilogy in any way?
No.
Okay.
Not at all.
That's just something you jerry-rigged to explain the last three.
Yeah.
So why did you want to write a love story? Why was that important?
Well, because I think love stories are the films that have the most impact on us. And there's not that many, I must say. I mean, here, there's the romantic comedy as a genre. In France, we don't really even have that, I think.
We're doing it increasingly less in this country, too.
Yeah, too, you know?
Yeah.
And it's weird because it's I mean, we all have a big appetite. And as cinephiles, we all have this passion for films that are not even interesting, in cinematically speaking,
right,
but that we adore because, and like if you look at the greatest film in the history of cinema, Gone with the Wind, Titanic, it's love stories, Pretty Woman. So I really wanted to confront myself to that genre and to craft a film that would be really generous and also love story. I mean, it's also a lesbian love story, and that hasn't been done much. And I wanted to give that also,
especially in a period piece like this. So I'm sure there was a lot of intentionality around the time that this film is set. I was hoping you could kind of explore and explain some of that, like kind of right at the height of the Age of Enlightenment and what's happening in France at that time. Mm-hmm. And maybe you can help us understand why you wanted to set a film in this period.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted the 18th century for the Enlightenment, which is a very, very important moment in France. And I mean, we keep convoking it today regarding very political matters like the Enlightenment, like the universalism, for instance. France is strong. It really revendicates universalism, and whereas communitarism, and this, like it would be this ideal, and we keep living every day. It's convoked every day, even though, I mean, our president keeps talking about that. So politically, it was interesting to set the movie at that time, but it was mostly also for a matter of art history, because at that particular moment, the second half of the 18th century, there was and I was ignorant about that, I must say, there was a very strong female driven art scene, also with a critic scene, and there were hundreds of women painters in Europe. And then there was backlash, and we keep being told that women's rights, women's opportunities keep growing, and it's not true. It's a cycle, and as we are going through today, some kind of cultural shift around this question, we also experience strong backlash and resistance. So, I mean, I was amazed to discover the body of work of these women that were erased from art history. It's glorious, it's beautiful, and it's missing. It's missing to art history, but that can be corrected, But it has been missing from our lives. I mean, I felt looking at these images, like these images have been missing from my life. Like it would have been better if I had encountered the body of work of these women. I would have felt less lonely, because that's what. The fact that we are missing women's perspective in literature, in art in general, it means that we are not. Of course, we're missing great pieces of art, but also we're not given the transmission of our intimacies, because that's what literature is. Also, sharing the experience of a character, and so that's a way to isolate women. We're not being given the historicity of our intimacies, of our desires, and that was the project also with Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I wanted to give back to these women their desire. It's not because you're oppressed that you don't have the desire. Right. It's not because you don't love who you want that you're not full of love for somebody. And
I also can't imagine a more intimate movie. It is truly a movie between two people, a secret, unspoken in many ways between two people the whole time.
Yeah.
This is very smart. I was reading that you write your films scene to scene.
Yep.
But I'm curious, especially for something like this, which is an invention in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Is it character first? Is it setting and time first? Is it story first? Like, how do you come to the decision to begin writing something?
Well, it is images and scenes first. I take a long time buffering. I take a long time having this reverie, dreaming about things, not trying to bring things together. For instance, for portrait, I had since the beginning, I had the final scene that we're not going to talk about, but I had
no
that.
Spoilers here.
I had the image of Adele and Elle being really set on fire, for instance, not knowing why would this happen, but I had this. I had.
What do? You jot it in a notebook? You open up your computer?
I opened up my computer, I read it, and I used only one file and put all the ideas and dream about them, and never give up on the desire. Because those things that come to you first, if you're not trying to put them in a storytelling, if not trying to make them fit in, they stay as compass, and they will be in the film. They will be. You have to put them in the film, and then I begin to think about the storytelling, but the unit is always the scenes. I'm always thinking about the scenes and not the plot, for instance, and trying to find solutions for the plots within the scenes. So basically, when I have a list of all the scenes, I begin to write the script. But before that, it's not. Sometimes it can also be a line of dialogue. For instance, I had "Don't regret, remember," like a motto, and I didn't know it would be like part of the dialogue. It could be part of an idea. It could be of a global philosophy.
I wrote that into my notes for a question later. So it's a puzzle that you've never seen pieced together before.
Exactly.
And you have all of the pieces.
Exactly.
That sounds very difficult to make it fit together, though.
It is.
Is it challenging to actually construct a coherent story from that?
It is very challenging, but it is very exciting. It puts you in a dynamic where you're like hunting for a treasure in a way. You're like, it's mapping the film, and it's actually fun. I mean, it's really challenging, but I hadn't been always doing like this.
Your other films feel so naturalistic. I wondered if this is so. I mean, I'm sure you've heard it's very painterly, the new film, and very purposefully, I'm sure. But the images are so stark and so defined.
Yeah.
But your other films don't feel quite that same way to me.
Yep.
So is this the first time you're doing it specifically in that way?
Well, there's a reason for that. I think it is that my previous films, there were no reverse shot. Very few. Very, very few.
Will you explain to the listeners what that means?
Well, it means like if we would film our conversation, for instance, there would be a shot on you, and then there would be a shot on me, and we would edit this. And it's basic cinema grammar. Every film has shot, reverse shot. You can't find a film without a shot, reverse shot. I mean, otherwise they'll be conceptual.
Right.
And I'm all about long takes and trying to find choreography of the body in a frame. So using the dolly a lot. And when I had this idea about the relationship between a painter and a model, I thought, okay, but this is going to be a film about shot, reverse shot. I'm going to have to do this. And I don't have a strong appetite for this. So now, but it's like, you're like a student also. When you write, you're like a student with no teacher. You're like a student studying your own film in a way. And so then when I decided, I realized that it would have to be basically about shot, reverse shot because the model is in front of the painter. Then you begin to reflect on that on different ways. Like how can you make shot, reverse shot fun? How can you even build the storytelling around this idea that one character will go in her own gaze, because like if you're in your shot and you go in the shot of the other person, then it's a tension, it's a dramatic tension. So
when you introduce the mirror into the frame too, that is the third level of understanding. The seeing yourself in someone else quite literally is the most, well, I don't want to digress too much, but that blows my mind when you put it in that context.
And that's being playful, and that's harvesting an ideas. And so that's why I think this film is also quite different, because it's not working on it's not thinking about the same grammar of cinema. Mm-hmm.
So you were thinking about exploding some of the formal dynamics that you had settled on from your last three films too here? Was that a very purposeful choice that you were making as you were designing the movie?
No, it was a total a consequence of the storyline, I must say. So it wasn't about, okay, how am I going to renew myself? It was about, okay, I have this, the relationship is based on model and the painter. So, well, how am I going to shoot this? And so, okay, so I have to reflect on shot, reverse shot. So it wasn't about, I'm going to make it different. It just organically happens, and you have to be honest. I mean, you just have to be honest. And I think especially at the stage of screenwriting, the more honest you are with what's going to happen, like with the storyboarding, the future storyboarding of the film, the most honest you are about that, then the most playful you will be with this. You know, you won't become the victim of what you've been writing, because sometimes it happens. You can become the victim of what you've been writing, because you're like, okay, painter and a model, if I didn't think shot, reverse shots, if I didn't went through with this idea through the process of the screenplay, I could have, I would have had less desire for that situation, because it's also very repetitive. And I mean, the movie is a lot about rituals, because, she's going to pose a lot of times. It is set mostly in one room, which it can put a lot of pressure. Like, how am I going to have desire for that room every day? Like, I had a grip, is that the word?
Yes.
Grip, yeah, there was like an extra on the set, and he hadn't read the script, and he stayed with us for the whole shooting, actually. But like on the fourth day, we were shooting in the workshop of the painter. Was like, when are we changing rooms? We're like, never. And he was like, that's impossible. Well, yes, it is.
So one of the ways that you, I guess, build anticipation for that shot reverse shot is this incredible, very patient 20 minutes before we meet Adele's character, or at least see her face. And you just see the back of her head in that first encounter and that trailing shot, which is just an amazing, I love that sequence. Can you maybe explain what your thinking was behind almost making us wait to get to see her, and to wait for Naomi's character to get to see her, and what all that meant?
Yeah, it's the character, Eloise's character, doesn't want to be painted. And the beginning of the film is about that tension, that cinematic tension of having the desire to see somebody's face, which could be the definition of cinema or introducing a character. Like, how do you create the appetite for a face, and especially a face that you have already seen? Because that's the paradox, because Adele Haenel's face is identified, especially in France. People know her.
She's on the poster.
She's on the poster. So why would you, spoiler alert, we know her face. Like, how do you build tension around that? Which is an amazing question to ask yourself. And it's a very Hitchcockian move also. I'm not a cinephile director that doesn't. I watch a lot of films, and I have the cinephile culture, but I'm not a cinephile director in a way that I'm not trying to dialogue with past filmmakers, doing quotes or whatever. In this film, there's a quote. Actually, there's a quote from Bergman, Persona. There's a frame that is definitely a wink or an homage.
This film shares a lot with Persona. Two women
trapped in
a home in an island.
Yeah.
There's something there that makes sense.
Yeah. But otherwise, I'm not into this reference thing. But that moment felt, I was like, it's gonna be Hitchcockian.
Yes. Yeah. There's maybe a little Rebecca, a little suspicion, a little bit of that in there.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So, so many of the sequences of the film, like I said, feel so designed. Are you storyboarding every single moment of the movie?
So I'm not storyboarding. In the process of writing, I'm always trying to be accurate about where scenes, about the cuts, for instance. I'm trying to edit the film within the script. The film has been, and the editing process quite confirmed it. I mean, the film hasn't been, the scenes are in the order where they were written, and the cuts are basically the one that were written.
Did you shoot it in sequence as well?
No, not at all.
Okay.
And I don't consider the script done unless I can definitely see how each scene is going to be storyboard. I don't know the word. In France, we say découpage, but I don't know if you have that word. Like, découpage means cut. Well, anyway. But each day before I rethink it each day before shooting, and I come on the set and tell about what we're gonna do. So it's a double process of thinking about it before and then re-questioning it every day, which is something that because you're building the language of the film, and I mean, at the end of the shooting, you're practically more in the position to invent than at the beginning, which is a paradox also, I think, because you're building this language and you begin to speak it more and more. You learn the own language of the film. And that's also something I always think about when I think about the audience. I think the pleasure of the audience should be that they get to speak the language of the film and get it and be more and more connected to the language that they speak, like it would be a new language, and then they will speak it. Like for instance, page 28, it's definitely an idea like that. It's like you own that language. A number can break your heart, but that number, and maybe that number will break your heart in life, hopefully.
It may now if people see the film, yes.
And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about language. So in the process of shooting the film, like in the last days of shooting, you know that language so well that you can play with it even more. That's the beauty of doing that job, I think.
Do you have a meticulous level of specificity in the script? Like the dress must be green, for example. Like, is all of that very clearly demarcated?
Yeah. I mean, the green dress, for instance, yes, that's a good example. But the way Marianne was dressed, for instance, there was no color involved. So it's there are something that I won't compromise with, and there are things that are open, so that because the cinema is very collaborative. So, and I enjoy that very much. So. But for instance, for Marianne's dress, I didn't know the color, didn't know the fabric, didn't know what would be the style, but I knew that I wanted her to have pockets, for instance. So that was the costume designer came up with the fabric, this idea of this fabric, and also the color that wasn't really part of my world, because I'm not a very burgundy red person. In my film, very few warm color in a way. But I went for it. I was like, okay, this is new, and but didn't compromise on the presence of pockets, for instance.
So it looks like you shot this with natural light. Is that all? Are all your films shot in natural light?
No, and it's not shot in natural light.
Oh.
I mean, it is partly, all the exteriors obviously are shot in natural light. And we begin with this. So it was an 8-day shooting in Brittany. We were surprised by an amazing sun, which is not the case in Brittany. I mean,
a little cloudy there?
Yeah, usually it's gray, and I wanted that gray gothic atmosphere. And well, then I was totally, I have no control over meteorology, but we welcomed this as a good news. But then we had to take back that light from Brittany to the castle where we're shooting in the Parisian periphery. It's a very ancient castle that wasn't untouched. For instance, the color of the wall was original. We didn't paint anything. We didn't touch anything. But we couldn't hang any lights on inside the room, for instance. So it's all lit from the outside, and we had this big It was really like we put a lot of money into this. There was this very big structure with a lot of lights, and it would be really, really accurate. We wouldn't use actually the natural lighting.
It's so funny because I feel like so many of, especially things framed in front of the window, I
Yeah.
was like, wow, this is like Barry Lyndon or something. The way
Yeah,
that it's captured, it really feels that way.
There's like 20 spotlights over there
Amazing.
doing the job. Yeah. And the night scenes, of course, with the candle agenda, which is really, you could look at every period film really just looking at the candles, and that would tell a lot about the directing choice. That was something that took a lot of time and a lot of invention also, because as we couldn't put any spotlight in there, regarding the candle, like, do you put the source in the frame or not? And you have to invent a whole bunch of lights with rope lights mostly. And the set would be like, for just one candle, the set would be full of rope lights, very, very strange shape. And all the actresses were always, how do you call that? They were always followed by a guy with a light, as they would be followed by the microphone for the sound.
Wow.
So when it's long takes of Marianne crossing the hall, taking the stairs and riding through the castle, she's basically always followed by a whole bunch of lights. Because obviously the candle didn't lit anything. But you could also make that decision, or it's all candle lit, and like,
as I understand it, that's very hard to do.
It is.
That's sort of why I ask.
Yeah,
but also that choreography that you must have been doing just to use that lighting rig must have been really difficult to pull off.
It was.
But it really works.
The most difficult part for me was the waiting, because if you decide, when people are saying me, how do you make it beautiful? Well, you have to give time. You have to give time to the DP and the camera crew. So basically, it was a lot of, and it's a kind of it's not that only, I'm a smoker, so I can wait. But it's not about the fact that I have to wait and I'm bored. It's the fact that, well, it's time you will have less time with the actresses. So, it's a strong decision. But I'm glad we took it.
I love the way that you've captured the act of painting in the movie.
Yeah.
It's so tactile. How did you, who is the painter in the film? I assume it's not Naomi.
No.
Okay. Who is that? How did that happen?
I really wanted to show a painter at work. That's also why we chose to shoot digital with a very, very high resolution, which was also a decision that had consequences, because regarding focus, we had a very narrow window. The actress, it would really constrain them, their whole body, the way they would move. And focus guy was like lost a lot of sweated a lot, I think.
Some of your other, Water Lilies is on film, right? I don't know if your other films are also on film.
No, Water Lilies was 35 milliliters. Tomboy was shot with a 7D, Canon 7D was one of the first films shot with this.
Partially why it's cheaper, I'm sure, than Water Lilies.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this one, digital. And what was I talking to you about that? Oh, the painting.
Yes.
It was mostly about that, because we wanted to have to see the moist of the painting, the colors, and so the painter, I was looking for somebody who was able to make it look 18th century, but didn't want to go with a copyist or a specialist. Wanted to work, also because it was the film, with a contemporary painter who would be 30, who would be the age of the character. So I encountered Hélène Delmer's work, she's the painter of the film, on Instagram, actually. Totally fell in love with her work. Wrote to her. She had been studying oil painting in Florence, in Italy, with a maestro specialist of the 19th century. That's why our Marianne is a little bit avant-garde. But it was mostly important to me. I knew that it wasn't going to be like 18th century perfect, but I kind of didn't care, let's be modest and let's try to, but the painting should belong to the film. And so we worked with Hélène, who had no interest or knowledge about cinema. We were both ignorant of how hard it was going to be. When you look at film with painters, it's pretty rare that you get to invent a painter. Usually it's like the biopic of, I don't know, Turner or Van Gogh, we know their body of work, and it's like about, the pleasure of seeing it happening. And I understand why it's hard to invent a painter. It's super hard because you have to create everything and make it true.
I was wondering if you had studied painting at any period of your life just to have access to that. What goes into that? I mean, as I'm watching it as a know nothing, I'm kind of blown away by the idea of someone just inventing a painting style on camera.
Yeah. It was crazy. It was like the hardest job. It was like really the thing. Like, luckily I was ignorant. Otherwise I wouldn't have done it. And it was painful also for her because, like, for each painting, it's 80-hour job.
Wow.
And it's cinema, so she had to paint several because there were different steps, and we weren't doing this chronologically.
That's amazing.
That's amazing. She nearly died. But and she had to create several paintings. The portrait of Lady on Fire that we see in the beginning, and there are several paintings. Well, we don't want to spoil that, but that was super hard. But the beauty of it is that she would come on the set, and she would paint before. I mean, we would do the canvas before we would do a Noémie Merlan painting, but Noémie would look at her, so she would see what the painter was doing, and especially, the gestures, but mostly also the choreography, the steps, how you take a look back, how you come back, and the gaze of the painter, which is very, very specific. So there was a strong collaboration between them that was beautiful to watch also.
How has it been to have your film kind of explode in a way? I mean, this is certainly, it feels like the noisiest reception you've gotten in the States. Obviously, you won an award at Cannes, and it was hugely celebrated, and it feels like a bigger amount of exposure to someone like me.
Yeah.
What has it been like to kind of enter that realm as a filmmaker?
It's full of contrast, I must say. It's not one thing. It's the thing I enjoy the most is feeling totally depossessed of the film. The fact that
what do you mean by that?
Well, the fact that there's kind of a cult around it. Yeah. Maybe it's not a lot of people, but it's definitely super strong.
I talked to Todd Haynes a few months ago, and I've talked to him a few times, and the relationship that people have to Carol reminds me a lot of the relationship to this movie, and not just because of the love story at the center of it, but because of the amount of the affection, the sort of intense affection that people have for it who've seen it is really quite unusual.
It is.
in cinema now.
And it is because it is a lesbian love story. Because Carol is also a lesbian love story. It's because it has been missing from the screen, and so people get passionate about it. That's why we should make those films that's why we must be very careful, because there will be passion. So we must make the most beautiful, intelligent film. And that moves me the most because that reminds me of my own relationship with cinema when I was a teenager, or even.
What was a film that you had built a cult to?
I built a cult to Mulholland Drive. Mulholland Drive, for instance, that is also a lesbian love story.
True.
That's why also it was a cult for me, because I wanted to see those images. And the fact that I've been liking lousy direct-to-DVD lesbian love story. I've been loving them because I had to wait till I was 16 to see two women kiss on screen, but I'd never seen it in life either. Imagine how lonely, how ignorant of, not ignorant of how it goes, but how ignorant of how you feel about this you are. And Mulholland Drive was kind of totally a cult around that film, but mostly also because he actually he crafted a narrative about love. Everybody seems to think the movie is super mysterious. It's really simple. Anyway, it's just like he's telling this the first half of the film is a dream about the second half, the realities. It's really easy. But what does it tell us about love? It tells us, Mulholland Drive says that I love you is always something that you say in the past. Like, that's it, because that's the most striking thing in Mulholland Drive. Those two women, they don't know each other. Suddenly they're in bed, and one of them said to the other, I think I'm in love with you. And this is striking because it's mysterious, but it's even more striking when at the end of the film, because it's not mysterious at all. It says that I love you is not something I always say in the future. And I thought a lot about Mulholland Drive while writing Portrait, because I thought I have to find a narrative that will also say something about love. It's not about just, crafting a love story. It's what's going to be the politics of love, the philosophy of love that I want to hand to people. And it's the opposite, is that I love you is something you will always say in the future, is a sentence that always has a future.
I can't interrogate that anymore because I don't want to spoil the movie for people. You mentioned you sort of feel dispossessed from the movie. Are there downsides to a movie like this getting such extraordinary exposure?
Well, the downside is that when it's despised, you take it very badly.
Yeah. Well, have you had some complicated? I feel like most of the reaction has been so positive.
Yeah, here it's amazing. But I mean, the movie's been released. I've done 15 countries, 15 release of the film, and from one culture to another, I must say the French culture is quite resisting the film. Yeah, it didn't really do well in the French box. I mean, it did okay, but it's an international hit, but domestically was didn't felt quite understood, I must say.
What accounts for that, do you think?
It's totally about French culture, I think. Like, for instance, the French critics thought the film was cold and was lacking flesh.
That is the opposite of how Americans have received the movie.
Exactly. So, I'm not here to comment on that. I mean, it's what they feel. It's their culture. It's like, but it's troubling because I was really trying to make this film that I found hot, and like the people tell you it's cold. It's like, okay, it's still kind of contrast. Sometimes they can be not hard to live. Come on, this is like this crazy, beautiful life that I have, but asking myself questions about the difference.
So beyond the obvious increased level of exposure in this country and elsewhere, you mentioned that this feels like it is a leveling up in some ways. Do you intend to make even bigger films than this? Do you have a sense of what kind of films you want to make in the future?
Well, I'm thinking about it. Yeah. My next dream, so it might not be my next film, but my next dream is to make a very, very long form, like very long, like
television?
Well,
or like an epic film?
Not an epic film, not television. I don't know, but I mean, no, I'm not saying I want to make a six mini series, something like. Maybe I will. I've always wanted to write a very long form, and I love TV series. I mean, I love TV series, of course, but it's been an inspiration for Girlhood, for instance, was built like of 5 episodes of 26 minutes.
Right.
So it was kind of influenced by the rhythm of television. But I'm trying to think out of the box and think like, I just can't tell you that I want it to be super long, but maybe it will be 8 hours of streaming. Maybe it will be, but without episodes. Maybe it will be, I don't know. I'm buffering.
It's interesting. You're buffering. Yeah. Each of your films, I feel like each is longer than the last too.
Yeah.
As I feel like, do you feel more confident writing at length as well when you're doing this?
Yeah, but the weird thing is that the scripts are always really short. For instance, Portrait is only 68 sequences, 68 scenes, which I know can seem like people don't really know how many scenes there are in a film, but like a classic script would be 90 pages and 110 scenes, something like that. Portrait was like 80 pages and... So sometimes I don't have really the sense of, because, usually a page is a minute. So you're like, okay, 90 page, an hour and a half.
You like those long shots?
I like those long shots too. And I like to find the rhythm also. You get a sense of the rhythm live when you are on the set. And at some point you're like, okay, in continuity, person is looking at you saying, your movie is going to last 2 hours. I'm like, okay, why not? But it's not that I have that in mind,
Céline, we end every episode of the show by asking filmmakers what's the last great thing they've seen. Have you seen anything special lately?
I haven't seen much because mostly I've been seeing the last 2 minutes of my film last 9 months for
your Q&A work.
But I'm going to say something that is maybe that might seem conventional, especially these days around her award season. But I must say that Phoebe Waller-Bridge Fleabag has given me a lot of joy, laughs, emotion, and I think she's a great author, and I'm just trying to meet her in the city. If you hear this, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, like, let's hang out.
What is it about that show that you responded to?
I think it's. I mean, I feel connected to the project. I mean, I even feel like we have. There's this kind of connection regarding the philosophy of the gaze and the representation, and I think she's it's just brilliantly directed and good comedy. I mean, comedy when it is that good, as everything I want from fiction. And I don't know.
You're gazing into the middle distance, looking for the right word.
Yeah, I just think it's brilliant, and I can't wait for what she does next.
I feel the same about you. I think Portrait is an absolute masterpiece. So thanks for doing the show.
Thank you.